Of shooting and killing her father at their home.
High burden of proof.
So most people, when they're standing in a courtroom hearing the worst things they've ever done described back to them, they at least have the decency to look away. Maybe stare at the table, maybe look at the floor. Maybe they cry because they know their life is over, or at least because they know everyone in that room thinks they should. But some people laugh. Marcus Terry. So back in April 2021, a correctional officer at the Dade Correctional Institution in Homestead, Florida, was doing rounds inside the facility when he came across something terrible. Ray Matos was lying on the floor of his cell in a pool of blood. His cellmate, Marcus Terry, was sitting right there on the lower bunk with blood all over his hands. He wasn't calling for help. He wasn't panicking. He was just sitting there like nothing happened. And the thing is, these two had only been sharing that cell for about 6 days. That's it. Less than a week. What investigators pieced together was that Terry had taken a regular ballpoint pen and driven it directly into Matos's brain. He also shoved a pillowcase into the man's mouth. Matos was barely breathing when he was found, and he didn't survive. So here's some context about Terry. He was already serving a life sentence for armed burglary and armed robbery out of Broward County. He'd been locked up since 2012, and he was never getting out. This was a person who had already been through the system, already been sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. But for reasons that nobody has been able to fully explain, he decided to do this to a man he had known for less than a week. An inmate nearby told investigators he heard what sounded like a fight that went on for about 10 to 15 minutes. Another inmate said he saw Terry afterwards standing over Matos's body, naked and covered in blood. Terry would later try to claim self-defense. He said that Matos attacked him after they both smoked synthetic drugs and that he had no choice. He also reportedly told a sergeant on scene that the two of them should never have been placed in the same cell and that he wanted to hurt himself. But nothing about the physical evidence supported that story. Matos was lying in his own blood while Terry sat a few feet away, completely unbothered. Terry was transferred to the Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center in Miami-Dade and charged with second-degree murder. The case took years to work its way through the system, partly due to pandemic-related delays and procedural motions from the defense. His attorney, Stephen Yermish, argued at trial that inadmissible evidence had been presented to the jury and requested a new trial. The judge denied that motion. In December 2025, a jury found Terry guilty. And then on the 22nd of April 2026, he was back in court for sentencing before Miami-Dade Circuit Court Judge Ellen Sue Venza. That's when the whole thing went sideways. As the judge was describing the details of the attack to the courtroom, going through exactly how Terry jammed a pen into his cellmate's brain and stuffed a pillowcase into his mouth, Terry started giggling. Out loud. The judge stopped and told him she wasn't sure why he was laughing. Terry, still grinning, told her she was amusing. Venza sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The clip was everywhere within hours. Keith Ferguson.
Raise your right hand for me.
Okay.
In November 2014, a small community in Kalkaska County, Michigan, was completely turned upside down by one of the worst domestic crimes anyone in the area had ever seen. Tiffany Ferguson was 42 years old, a mother of 4, and she was deeply involved in the community. She helped start a local youth hockey association, and a Kalkaska publication actually named her Mother of the Year back in 2012. Pretty much everybody in town knew who she was. Her husband Keith was 40. By the fall of 2014, the marriage had fallen apart. Tiffany filed for divorce in September, and a court hearing was scheduled for that Friday. But Keith didn't wait for it. On the night of November 18, he went to Tiffany's home in Cold Springs Township and shot her in the head multiple times. The Kalkaska County prosecutor, Mike Perot, who actually knew both victims personally, would later tell the court that Keith Ferguson pulled a gun and shot the Mother of the Year in the head again and again. And then he did something that makes this even harder to process. He put on body armor, gathered up firearms and explosives, loaded all 4 of his children into a vehicle, and drove them to the home of Tiffany's father, 63-year-old James Weber, in nearby Excelsior Township. Weber was well known around Kalkaska. He owned rental properties and was a regular at McLean's Home Center, the local hardware store. Ferguson shot and killed him there, with the children present. 2 of the kids ran to a neighbor to the south, 2 ran to a neighbor to the north. They went to neighboring houses and one of those neighbors happened to be a Kalkaska County Sheriff's deputy who called 911 right away. The children told the neighbor their father had shot their mother and their grandfather. Around the same time, Ferguson called 911 himself from a different home over in Orange Township. He'd taken a hostage who had absolutely zero connection to him or his family. He told dispatchers he would shoot any officer who came near. The standoff lasted several hours before Ferguson finally gave himself up. The hostage was released unharmed. He later confessed that he'd actually planned to go to yet another home that night but took a wrong turn, and that's how he ended up at the random house with the random hostage. Nobody knows where he was actually headed or what he planned to do when he got there. The community was devastated. Donations came in through a memorial fund set up at a local credit union for the 4 children who had just lost their mother and grandfather in a single night. Ferguson ended up pleading guilty to 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. As part of the plea deal, 10 other charges, including kidnapping and explosives, were dropped. His bond had been set at $10 million. At earlier court appearances, Ferguson was loud, volatile, and disruptive. He screamed profanities at the judge, refused to discuss the details of the crime, and at one point demanded to be given a death sentence. But at his sentencing on the 17th of March 2015, he was uncharacteristically quiet as Judge George Mertz handed down life in prison without parole. Mertz told Ferguson directly that while he may not meet the clinical definition of insanity, there was clearly something fundamentally wrong with him. Bianca Ellis.
Bianca Ellis in handcuffs.
She glared, but otherwise showed no obvious reaction.
On the afternoon of the 3rd of June 2024, a woman walked into a Volunteers of America thrift store on Lorraine Road in North Olmsted, Ohio, and stole 2 knives. Then she walked right next door to a Giant Eagle grocery store, and what happened in that parking lot a few minutes later left an entire community in shock. Inside the store, Bianca Ellis spotted 3 7-year-old Margot Wood shopping with her 3-year-old son Julian, who was sitting in the shopping cart. Ellis followed them through the store, past the checkout, out the doors, and into the parking lot. When Margot reached her car and started loading her groceries, Ellis attacked. She stabbed Julian multiple times while he was still sitting in the cart, inflicting wounds to his face and back. Margot tried to pull her son free and was stabbed herself in the process. Several people in the parking lot saw what was happening and called 911. Bystanders rushed over to try to help. When police arrived, they found Ellis walking calmly down the road toward Dover Center, still holding a knife. She was taken into custody without any resistance. Julian was rushed to the hospital, but his injuries were too severe. The Cuyahoga County medical examiner confirmed that he died from his stab wounds. He was just 3 years old. Margot survived physically, but there is no recovering from something like that. The community response was overwhelming. Vigils were held in the days that followed, and people who had never met the Wood family left flowers and stuffed animals at the scene outside the Giant Eagle. Julian's father, Jared Wood, later told the court that their hearts would forever be missing a piece. And this was completely random. Ellis had never met the Wood family. She had no connection to them, no prior interaction, nothing. Police confirmed almost immediately that this appeared to be a random act of violence with no identifiable motive. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Michael O'Malley said he could not begin to imagine the grief the family was enduring. Ellis was indicted by a grand jury just 2 days after the attack on charges including aggravated murder, but the road to trial was long. She underwent multiple competency evaluations, was sent for psychiatric treatment, and was eventually ruled competent to stand trial in February 2025. Her defense team then shifted course and filed a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, arguing that Ellis suffered from schizophrenia and didn't understand the nature of her actions. The trial began in early October 2025 before Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court Judge John J. Russo. Expert witnesses clashed over whether Ellis understood the nature of her actions that day, with 2 forensic psychiatrists reaching completely opposite conclusions. But on October 15, the jury rejected the insanity defense and found Ellis guilty on all charges, including aggravated murder and 9 additional counts. 12 days later, Judge Russo sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He told the courtroom that nothing he could say would capture the enormity of the loss, and that no sentence would make the Wood family whole again. Throughout the trial and pre-trial hearings, Ellis was described as standoffish and at times appeared to find the proceedings amusing. At sentencing, Margot Wood addressed Ellis directly. Ellis has since filed an appeal. Keith Smith.
Sibley Reynolds re-sentenced Keith Smith to 30 years.
So this case is different from everything else on this list, and it's controversial for a reason that becomes pretty clear once you hear the details. Because the person convicted of murder here never actually hurt anyone. He never fired a gun. And depending on how you feel about felony murder laws, this case is either justice working exactly as it's supposed to, or a system failing a child. In February 2015, 5 teenagers in Millbrook, Alabama, were carrying out a series of daytime burglaries. They were hitting unoccupied homes, mostly looking for gaming systems, tablets, and electronics, while the residents were at work or out of town. Keith Smith was 15 years old at the time, the youngest of the group. The others included Adonte Washington, Jadarian Hardy, Javaska Jackson, and Leanthony Washington. A neighbor noticed an unfamiliar car pull up to a house where she knew the owner was away. She called the police. Officers from the Millbrook Police Department responded and entered the home. According to law enforcement, 2 of the teenagers inside opened fire on the officers. Adonte Washington ran out of the house through a backyard fence. He was armed with a .38 caliber revolver. A responding officer shot and killed him. A grand jury reviewed the shooting and cleared the officer involved. But here's where this case takes a turn that gets people very upset. Under Alabama's felony murder rule, all 5 teenagers were charged with Adonte Washington's death, even though a police officer was the one who fired the shot. The law says that if someone dies during the commission of a felony, every participant in that felony can be held responsible for the death, regardless of who actually caused it. It doesn't matter that Smith never had a gun. Under the statute, his involvement in the burglaries was enough. 3 of the 4 surviving teens took plea deals. Hardy received 28 years. Smith was offered 25 years. He turned it down and went to trial instead. In March 2018, he was convicted of felony murder, armed burglary, and theft. Despite being 15 at the time of the offense, he was tried as an adult. The following month, Circuit Judge Sibley Reynolds sentenced him to 65 years, broken down as 30 for felony murder, 15 for burglary. The courtroom erupted after the sentence was read. Adonte Washington's own father appeared in court and asked the judge to let Smith go free, saying enough damage had already been done. Smith's defense attorney, Leroy Maxwell, argued that Smith was the least culpable member of the group because he was the youngest and there was no evidence he had ever fired a weapon. The sentence was later reduced to 55 years when the theft sentences were allowed to run concurrently. Then, in March 2023, Smith was resentenced by the same Judge Reynolds to 30 years, which is the sentence he's currently serving. His mother, Brontina Smith, has become one of the most vocal advocates in the country for reforming Alabama's felony murder statute. She has testified before state legislators about her son's case, and advocacy groups have rallied around Smith as a symbol of what they say is a deeply flawed law. But the moment people remember from this case happened at the original sentencing. While waiting to be called, Smith muttered that he didn't have time for this. Judge Reynolds heard him and brought it up directly. Smith laughed. The judge told him he clearly didn't get it. Reynolds noted that Smith had shown zero remorse throughout the entire trial and had never once apologized. Smith's own grandfather stood up and pleaded with the judge for mercy, and Smith offered nothing in return. Frank DeLeon Jr. On the night of the 11th of January 2022, a girl named Diamond Alvarez was out walking her family's dog near a field in southwest Houston, in the 5100 block of Markwood Lane. It was something she did most evenings, just a couple blocks from home. Her dog Peanut was with her. Diamond's family heard gunshots. Then Peanut came home alone. They went looking and found her body near the field. She had been shot 22 times, mostly in the back. Her mother, Anna Machado, tried to perform CPR on the scene, but Diamond was already gone. She was 16 years old. 6 days later, Houston police arrested Frank DeLeon Jr. and charged him with murder. DeLeon was Diamond's ex-boyfriend. According to investigators, Diamond had recently discovered that DeLeon was seeing another girl while they were still together. Police described it as a love triangle that ended in tragedy. On the night she was killed, DeLeon texted her and asked her to meet at the park near her house. She agreed. DeLeon was released on $250,000 bail just 1 day after his arrest. Diamond's family couldn't understand how that was possible. She was in the ground, and the person accused of putting her there was walking free. Then, in April 2022, DeLeon was arrested again for violating his bond conditions, including breaking curfew and leaving his approved area. He was released again after another bond hearing. His trial was set for October 2023, but De Leon didn't show up on day one. His defense attorney, Joaquin Jimenez, said his client had been in a car accident on the way to the courthouse and suffered injuries from the crash. The judge immediately forfeited his bond and issued a warrant. De Leon was eventually tracked down at Ben Taub Hospital being treated for injuries from the crash and was transferred straight to the Harris County Jail. Jimenez told reporters his client was not trying to run from the charges and that the accident was genuine. The next day, instead of going to trial, a Harris County judge offered a plea deal. De Leon took it. He pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for 45 years with parole eligibility after half, roughly 22 years, and he gave up his right to appeal. During the plea hearing, Diamond's mother gave a victim impact statement. She called De Leon a monster. She said he was laughing in her face the entire time she spoke. A family member lunged at De Leon at the defense table, and a full brawl broke out in the courtroom before bailiffs could pull everyone apart. That footage went everywhere. Diamond's family later said they were unable to attend the formal sentencing because they had been receiving threats on social media after the courtroom incident. Diamond was remembered as bright, hard-working, and full of dreams. Her friends and family described her as a happy person who loved school and... Enrique Martin Ayala.
Mr. Ayala, I'm Judge Roberto Garza, sitting here as Municipal Court Judge for the City of San Juan, County of Hidalgo, State of Texas. Before me, Magistrate.
On the evening of the 3rd of December 2024, officers with the San Juan Police Department in South Texas got called to a home on Cancun Lane for a domestic violence report. The caller was a woman saying her son had pushed her during an argument. She told dispatch she had found and destroyed narcotics in his possession, and he became aggressive afterward. She was heading to work and was scared to come home while he was still upset, so she wanted to file charges. Officers arrived around 7 p.m. and made contact with Enrique Martin Ayala at the front door. They interviewed the mother, established probable cause, and tried to place him under arrest. But during the arrest, Ayala slipped out of their grip. He grabbed a kitchen knife from inside the home and immediately started swinging at the officers. He stabbed Officer Matthew Martinez in the chin and neck area and sliced his left ear. Officer Anthony Meza was stabbed in the shoulder blade. Officer Anthony Soto took a wound to the upper torso under the armpit. All three were bleeding heavily, and San Juan Police Chief Leandro Cifuentes later described the injuries as serious. They tried to tase him, but it didn't work. Ayala ran back inside the house and escaped through a bedroom window, and that kicked off a full manhunt across the surrounding area. While the search was underway, another 911 call came in. Ayala, now carrying a different knife, had approached a man sitting in his car with his child. He demanded the vehicle and tried to stab the driver. The man blocked the attack with his hands, got cut in the process, but managed to get his child to safety and call for help. The driver suffered lacerations to both hands, but his child was physically unharmed. That was the second violent encounter Ayala had forced on complete strangers in under an hour. About an hour after the initial attack on the officers, police found Ayala hiding next to a house on Santa Fe Street, roughly a quarter mile from where everything started. He resisted arrest again but was eventually subdued. All three officers were hospitalized, 2 were placed in the ICU, and the third was treated and eventually released. All 3 recovered. Something that came out later was that these officers were all relatively new to the force. The most experienced one on scene that night had been out of the academy for only about 18 months. The other 2 had been sworn officers for less than a year. Ayala was arraigned the next day at San Juan Municipal Court. He was charged with 3 counts of attempted capital murder of a peace officer, along with aggravated robbery, assault, and resisting arrest. His bond was set at more than $3.2 million. He entered a no-contest plea and remains in Hidalgo County Jail as the case continues. But what people could not stop talking about was his behavior at the arraignment. He walked into the courtroom, smiling, shouted profanities at the gallery for no apparent reason, directed at nobody in particular, and then calmly accepted the charges and sat down. There was no protest about the case itself. There was no outburst about innocence or unfair treatment. He simply wanted the room full of people connected to the officers he had stabbed to know exactly how little he cared about any of it. Alyssa Bradburn.
New today, the Spokane woman accused of shooting and killing her father at their home back in 2024 was found guilty of first-degree murder just a few hours ago.
Spokane County judge ruled that Alyssa Bradburn would spend 28 years in prison after shooting and killing her father in their Spokane home.
On the 25th of June 2024, a woman in Spokane, Washington, called 911 in a calm voice and told the dispatcher she had just shot and killed her father. She said his body was in the entryway of their home on North Courtroom Street. She said she would be waiting outside for police, and that's exactly where they found her. The caller was 1-year-old Alyssa Bradburn. Her father, Timothy Bradburn, was 68 years old. He lived mostly in Hawaii, where he had a condo, but he'd come back to Spokane to fix a leaking roof at the family home. Alyssa told him she was feeling sick, which worried him enough to come straight inside first. She later told detectives that she had lied about being sick specifically to get him through the front door, because she knew he would be worried and would rush right in. The moment he walked through the front door carrying his suitcase and keys, she opened fire. The medical examiner found 4 gunshot wounds, 2 to the chest, 1 to the arm, and 1 to the forehead. Alyssa initially told detectives she thought she had only fired 3 times, but the autopsy revealed a 4th wound. Timothy was pronounced dead at the scene. And this was planned. Court documents showed Bradburn had been thinking about it for roughly 3 weeks. She practiced aiming the firearm inside the home. She went to a local gun range and asked for help loading the weapon. In the 4 days before the shooting, she started journaling about the plan and deliberately left the journal at the scene for police to find, as if she wanted investigators to know it was intentional. During her initial interview with detectives, Bradburn claimed her father had been emotionally abusive, that he was violent toward her dogs, and that he had assaulted her when she was younger, but she walked those claims back entirely during the trial. Her defense attorney, Brian Raymond, acknowledged during sentencing that she has a mental illness. He described her as neurodivergent and asked the court for the lower end of the sentencing range at 240 months. The trial began in late February 2026 in Spokane County Superior Court. Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Samantha Wright told the jury that Bradburn had lied to her father about being sick specifically to get him through the front door, because she knew he would rush inside if he thought she was in trouble. Witnesses testified about the journal entries, the gun range visits, and the fact that Bradburn had intentionally left a trail for investigators to follow. On March 2, after a short deliberation, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder with a firearm enhancement. Sentencing came on the 2nd of April 2026. Bradburn was given 340 months, roughly 28 years in prison. Throughout the entire trial, prosecutors said she sat stoically and smiled often. She took the stand and told the courtroom she had enjoyed the trial experience but believed she deserved punishment. Smiling, she told the court she had killed her father, that she was guilty, that she was not afraid anymore, and that she was fine going to prison for however long. Her brother, Trace Bradburn, gave a victim impact statement and told the court their father was an amazing man who never hurt anyone, and that the false accusations during the trial had deeply tarnished his memory. Wade Wilson.
In the Circuit Court of the 20th Judicial Circuit in Fort Lee County, Florida, criminal action. State of Florida versus Wade Wilson.
Having reviewed all of the aggravating factors proven beyond a reasonable doubt and all of the mitigating circumstances reasonably established by the evidence.
On the night of the 6th of October 2019, a man walked into a Fort Myers, Florida bar called Buddha Live and met 2 women, Christine Melton and her friend, Stephanie Sailors. The 3 of them hung out for the rest of the night. After the bar closed, they all went to a friend's place for a few hours and then ended up at Melton's home in Cape Coral. Sailors left at some point that morning. Melton stayed. She went to sleep in her own bed. And while she was lying there, Wade Wilson strangled her to death and stole her car. But his night was far from over. He drove to the Fort Myers workplace of another woman he'd been seeing, his girlfriend at the time, and tried to pull her into the car. She fought back, got away, and called the police. Still driving Melton's stolen vehicle, Wilson spotted Diane Ruiz walking along a Cape Coral street. Ruiz was a waitress and a mother of 2 sons, and she was heading toward her job. Wilson pulled over, asked for directions, and she got in the car. When Ruiz tried to get out, Wilson attacked. He beat her and strangled her inside the vehicle, then pushed her body out and ran her over repeatedly. His own biological father, Stephen Testaseca, would later testify at trial that Wilson described running her over 10 to 20 times during a phone call. Testaseca said Wilson sounded excited as he described it, like he was telling a story he was proud of. Ruiz's body wasn't found for 3 days, in a field behind a local Sam's Club. Her son Zane was supposed to have his debut in the high school marching band just days later. She never got to see it. So here's the thing about how Wilson got caught. After the murders, he called Testa multiple times and confessed to everything in graphic detail. Wilson had been placed for adoption as a baby and barely had a relationship with his biological father over the years, but on this day he kept calling. Testa didn't believe him at first, thought it was just talk, because his son was, in his own words, a good storyteller. But the details kept getting more specific, more graphic, and Testa realized this was real. He put his phone on speaker so his wife could listen, and she relayed everything to law enforcement in real time. Testa told Wilson he'd send an Uber to come get him. Instead, he gave Wilson's location to police. Wilson was arrested on the 8th of October 2019, and reportedly told detectives he would be willing to do it all again. The trial took place in June 2024 in Lee County. The media dubbed him the Deadpool Killer because he shares a name with the Marvel Comics character. The case drew a disturbing wave of online attention during the trial. On June 12, the jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 4 additional charges. They recommended the death penalty for both murders, voting 9-3 for Melton and 10-2 for Ruiz. On the 27th of August, 2024, Judge Nicholas Thompson formally sentenced Wilson to death, saying the aggravating factors greatly outweighed anything the defense had presented. The defense had argued Wilson suffered from brain injuries and substance abuse, but the court was not persuaded. Throughout the trial, Wilson sat with a smirk that people described as smug and soulless, and he showed no visible reaction when the death recommendation was read. His own father testified against him and told the jury his son had shown absolutely zero remorse. Ronnie O'Neal.
You need to speak audibly so that the jury can hear what you're saying.
Yes, ma'am, I haven't begun yet. I was talking to my father. And the evidence is going to show that law enforcement tampered with evidence to meet their such high burden of proof.
Just before midnight, on the 18th of March 2018, a 911 dispatcher in Hillsborough County, Florida, picked up a call from a woman who was screaming and begging for her life. Her name was Kenyatta Barron. She was 33 years old. On the recording, she can be heard apologizing over and over to someone named Ronnie. The call lasted about 4 minutes, and everyone listening could hear what was happening to her in real time. Ronnie O'Neal III was 29. He shot Barron at their home in Riverview, Florida, and then beat her with the shotgun as she tried to run. A neighbor heard the commotion, looked outside, and watched O'Neal strike and shoot her as she tried to get away. Her body was found outside the home. Then, he went back inside, where his 2 children were. His 9-year-old daughter, Ronivea, had cerebral palsy and was nonverbal. She could not speak, could not run, and could not call for help. O'Neal used a hatchet to end her life. His 8-year-old son, Ronnie IV, was stabbed multiple times. Then O'Neal set the house on fire with his daughter's body and his critically injured son still inside. But Ronnie IV, despite being stabbed and badly burned, managed to crawl out through the garage and collapse in the front yard. Before being airlifted to Tampa General Hospital, he told the deputies on scene that his father had shot his mother. He was not expected to survive, but he did. The detective who responded to the scene that night, Mike Blair, would later adopt him. O'Neal was taken into custody at the scene after being tased. While sitting in the back of the squad car, he referred to Barron and the children as devils. And then this case took a turn that nobody expected. O'Neal decided to represent himself at trial. He delivered his own opening statement, screaming at the jury. He cross-examined witnesses, including his own surviving son, who took the stand and testified about what he saw that night. The boy told the jury he could see tears rolling down his sister's face as she was attacked. The courtroom went completely silent. O'Neal told the jury that law enforcement had fabricated the 911 call and tampered with evidence to frame him. He accused the state of planting extra injuries on Barron's body. And then, during closing arguments, he made a confession that stunned the room. He told the jury he did kill Kenyatta Barron, but said any father would have done the same thing out of pure instinct and passion. On the 21st of June 2021, the jury found him guilty on all 7 counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, arson, and resisting arrest. They recommended life without parole. Kenyatta Barron's mother, Carrie Lloyd, addressed the court at sentencing. She said O'Neal had stolen angels from her family and that she sat through the entire trial watching him make a mockery of the courtroom. State Attorney Andrew Warren called the murders among the most cruel and vicious the community had ever seen. On the 23rd of July, 2021, Judge Michelle Cisco formally sentenced O'Neal to 3 consecutive life terms plus 90 additional years. Before handing down the sentence, she looked him in the eye and spoke for nearly 8 minutes. She said that in 19 years on the bench, she had seen people killed in every way possible: shootings, stabbings, drownings, suffocations, bodies torn apart in car crashes, and this, she said, was the worst case she had ever seen. She told the courtroom the evidence would haunt her for the rest of her life. When the firefighter who carried Ronnie's body out of the burning home broke down sobbing on the stand, she said it took everything she had not to start crying too. O'Neal addressed the victims' families before being led away. He told them not to hold it against his family, to hold it against him. He said this was their day for justice. And then he said he preferred death, but he was not going to die.